Today we're taking a look at the Takahashi. This is the new Tier 9 Japanese light cruiser, and it's a really weird one. As I've been grinding up to the Yodo Tier 10, I've had some thoughts about this line, and more specifically about this ship. It's really in a strange position here, considering it doesn't actually gain DPM or reload or anything over the Tier 8. Yes, you do get the Tier 9 upgrades of a heal and access to the 6th upgrade slot here, but it's basically just the Tier 8 ship, but given those 2 extra bonuses as a Tier 9 would. So it's a bit of an odd position where it should be really, really weak. And even though it is on the weaker side for Tier 9 light cruisers, I've been having some pretty good games in it, although they do take a long time. So that's going to be the problem with this line, especially with this Tier 9 here. Both these games that I'm going to show you here, we're going to do excellent damage, but it takes forever to get there. And that maybe is the downside of this entire line. It's kind of caught in between the assumptions made about light cruisers, high DPM, very little armor, short range, versatile, cap control kind of chips, right? Where you have a radar, for example, or you're pushing with DDs. And that large, heavy cruiser playstyle where you're playing open water, you're playing to stall an enemy's push out, you're very difficult to take down, you got big caliber guns that are good at long range. It's kind of a mix of the two. That's what this entire line is. So we're going to have some of those high damaging salvos. We have 15 HE shells, and even though they're pretty small, they do pretty good damage, especially on this build here. I'm still taking IFHE and heavy HE, trying to bump up that damage as much as possible, since I do find that to be the weak point here. We don't have DPM. We just don't have DPM with this line. So we need to figure out other ways to impact the battle in a reasonable way. And this first game I'm showing you is pretty much the perfect scenario for a Japanese light cruiser here. The enemy team is pushing into you. There's lots of battleships. There's opportunities to use both sides of your torpedoes, which are admittedly excellent zoning tools, right? 15 kilometers range. They do good damage. You get on this ship, I believe it's 8 per side, so up from 6 per side on the Tier 8, so that is a nice improvement. But I have noticed with this ship some real downsides to this line. Tier 8 it didn't matter as much since Tier 8 isn't as tough a competition these days. Tier 9s, of course, do have to face super ships, which is terrifying in a ship like this one, which hardly gets any upgrades over the Tier 8 at all. So really a big downside to this ship that I've found, it's a really minor thing that they could definitely change, and I hope they do give it a buff, the turret angles. I don't know why this ship with low DPM and not great shell velocity, sure it has range, but it's really hard to hit things at range thanks to the poor shell velocity, a lack of armor. Why is it so difficult to use all of my turrets, right? That third turret there in the front has atrocious firing angles looking backwards, and then anytime we are pushing into someone and we're trying to use all of our guns, we have to go basically broadside to get whatever turret. It's basically whatever turret is closest to the superstructure has atrocious firing angles. There you can see we missed out on that turret right there. It happens a lot, and it's very, very easy to do, and it brings this ship down on DPM even further than it already is. But like I said, I have been having some good games in it. I think I'm averaging over 120k in this one over more games, because of course it does take more games than Tier 8 to grind up to the Tier 10 here. And I've been just having a mediocre time with it. It's not really been anything too amazing or spectacular, but it hasn't been awful either. I do feel like I have had games where at least sometimes my damage has impacted the course of the battle. We don't have the battle impact from a radar or tankiness to push in and make a play, so we just have to impact the battle through our damage output. And some games I do feel like I can do that. Although the big issue here is that that damage output is one of the worst ways to impact short battles. So a lot of my good games here, and you're going to notice in these 2 games, they tended to go well past 10 minutes. As soon as you get those blowout games, you really just have no impact on those games whatsoever, which feels pretty bad. So I've been pretty negative on this ship so far. The Tier 8 I was just pleasantly surprised in because I just happened to get some really good matchmaker and do a ton of damage. But I assume the Tier 8 would be much more like this ship. Again, this is my grinding experience, so I'm not really playing hundreds of games in these ships and really telling you how they're going to play over a long number of games and the average, really. It's just how I've experienced the ship so far. And this tier 8 was kind of surprisingly good, but the tier 9 has given me a bit of that wake up to be, oh yeah, this line isn't that amazing. But is that okay? Maybe it's okay that this line isn't that amazing. A lot of the time when a new line comes out, it's very easy to just call it the flavor of the month, right? Criticize Wargaming on their consistent output of new lines and new ships and new gimmicks that are always stronger than the last. We don't want that as a community. I don't think. I don't want to speak for everyone, but for myself, I really don't want every new line to just be objectively more powerful than the last ones that came out. So I'm kind of okay with this line being as it is. It fits a weird position between a heavy and a light cruiser, in my opinion. So that kind of playstyle, if it's your thing, I think you could probably get a lot of enjoyment out of this ship. For me personally, it's not really what I'm looking for, but as we all know, I'm more into the battleships in this video game, less so on the DDs and cruisers, although I do enjoy playing them from time to time. So let me know what you think about that kind of in the comments below. I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, right? Saying, oh, it's fine these ships are bad because we don't want every new line to be OP. I know how that can sound too, so I'm not really sure what to think about these new ships. But like I said, the buff that I would love to see here is just make it easier to use all the turrets, right? Don't force me to go so broadside that I'm opening up my ship to massive damage every time I want to use my full DPM, which of course we know is not all that powerful anyway. That would be a nice thing for these ships. They do have range. The torps are devastating, but as you can see, it takes a long time. We've been here in this match for quite a while already. 7 minutes left, or 7.5 minutes left in this game, and we've only done up to 126,000 damage, and I've been shooting quite a lot. Like I said, this is a perfect kind of game where the battleships just want to push into me, and they don't really want to shoot me either. Notice our potential damage is just 500,000. That's nothing, basically, at tier 10 these days. So we're getting pretty lucky on this one. And I will say this ship does have a pretty giant citadel as well. Very easy to overmatch this entire ship. So it's big, takes a lot of damage, but we do get some HP, I suppose, to make up for that. 49,000 HP here, nearly 50,000 on the tier 9, so maybe that's okay. It's a weird ship. It's a weird ship, and it's a weird line. Coming into this game, though, more specifically, turning back in here, I'm always trying to be kiting away from battleships. A lot of my worst games in these ships have been where I've been stuck bow into someone, and then it takes a long time for these ships to turn out, and you're exposing a very vulnerable citadel. Very easy to get one shot in these ships. So keep that in mind, that playing with your concealment is always going to be beneficial. Instead of shooting when you're pushing in or trying to get into a position, try and stay dark a little longer, make that turn away, and then just shoot from a kiting position. That'll probably help you keep alive a little bit longer. We can do great damage into these DDs at close range, as you can see. The alpha damage is pretty nice. DPM maybe means it takes a little while to actually kill the DD. But hey, alpha damage is oftentimes really valuable in those DD engagements where you get the one shot off to help your friendly DD win that DPM engagement. So we end up with 155k. It's a pretty solid game. Mecklenburg does top us on the score. He's doing some serious work. But a pretty solid game. And here's another one where, in fact, I'm going to do even more damage. But the problem here is the damage is too slow, and it's too slow to really bring a lot of games back. Games have to be so close, really late into battles, for your damage output to start to matter. It's one of the criticisms leveled to some heavy cruisers or open water long-range cruisers, like Yoshino or Henry, that kind of thing. There's that citadel, by the way. yeah, it hurts. But it's some serious criticism leveled at some of these cruisers that don't have radar and that don't really play around islands. They don't push up to kill DDs. They're there to farm damage, right? And the criticism is that your damage doesn't really matter in a lot of games. It takes a long time and into that match for that damage battle impact to really be seen. And of course, with this line, it's kind of more so that way since you're taking up a light cruiser slot. Not that there's specific slots for other types of cruisers, but it is something to consider that you could have had something with a radar, a light cruiser with a radar, for example, instead of this ship. Or you could have taken a ship that's going to do better in those long-range open water engagements. It just seems like a mediocre line, a thoroughly mediocre line to me. Even though we've done 164k this game, it's not going to end very well for us. So the game is pretty much over, as you can see. And I wouldn't necessarily consider this too much of a blowout. As you can see, the enemy team has lost around half their ships, soon to be, at least once we collect this Amagi. And we have 3 ships remaining ourselves. If I'd been a little bit quicker in dealing with this Amagi on this flank, perhaps I'm able to rotate through sooner to deal with the guys in the north. And there's a lot of what-ifs we could play, which isn't really fair to this ship or the line really in general, because you're just going to compare it to a lot of OP ships. It's very easy to do that. I myself catch myself doing that all the time, comparing all these new ships to previously overpowered ships, and then writing them off as being useless, even though that's not really the intention. So as you can see, I'm pretty conflicted here. I agree with the sentiment online that these ships aren't that amazing. One thing I love about them is the turret traverse here, this little clip here at the end. Able to shoot the Iowa on one side of our ship and instantly rotate around to the other side. That's something that really Japanese ships don't have, right? Even something like Mogami, the turret traverse is atrocious, even though it has kind of that similar playstyle with the 155s, at least, if you do end up taking it. So it's a weird combination that kind of sits in the middle of light cruisers and heavy cruisers. And since it doesn't have that radar, lacks some of that battle impact. So then you're just not going to see it carrying games. You're not going to see it being that powerful of a ship, even though it's just all right. We do land another torp there, over 200k in this one even. That is the best game that I've had so far. But again, I'm very, very conflicted here, since I know it's a little mediocre, but I don't really want to tear it apart, because I don't want the opposite to happen, where every new line is just busted OP. And I can make these ships work. It's challenging, but these ships can work. As for the build here, I'm still running the same thing, trying to maximize our damage output, since I do find that to be the weakness. So IFHE is here, as well as heavy HE and SAP. It does make it hard to play. The worst concealment, not being able to take things like survivability expert, making us live a little bit longer. It means we got to play a little bit more passive, so we're not even taking some of the torpedo upgrade skills, although I do find the torps to be just good enough as they are. Upgrades wise, I have swapped back and forth between reload and range. I will be playing all these games in random battles, even though we could be doing it in airship escort. We're not sure how long that game mode is going to be around. I'd rather these videos be a little more useful to the battle that we know is going to stick around, which are the random battles games, which are obviously more passive and campy than airship escort, where if I was an airship escort, yeah, I would definitely be running main battery reload all the time. And I think it could do well there if you're getting into good positions to take advantage of people pushing in a predictable way. But again, light cruisers, you gotta watch out for getting citadeled off the map. It can happen quite easily. It's a long citadel, slightly above water. You can die pretty quickly in this ship. But again, I've had some pretty good games in it. Looking here, I can see I've got an average damage of 120,000, which isn't too bad. That's pretty good for a tier 9 light cruiser, especially with the matchmaker these days. It's not easy playing into some of those super ship games, which I have had quite a few of those. And I'm not going to show them to you because they weren't as good as the two that I had for this game. But hey, it takes a long time to get the damage, but it can deal some damage. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Soon we'll get the Yodo, and I'll be able to make a final video on that once I have it on my main account. Of course, early I was on a press account or just getting some rentals when they just first come into early access to make videos. It's hard to tell what a ship is exactly going to be like in those scenarios until you actually grind through it and play it a lot more. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.